Hi guys, this is Maya. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I know I'm late. I'm so sorry. I'm late to the game. It's been almost 2 weeks since it came out. I've been to see it 2 times already and I had to talk about this. It's the end of the trilogy. It's the end of these characters in Marvel Cinematic Universe, probably. It's the end of James Gunn in MCU. And for me, if I'm honest, it's probably final goodbye to Marvel in general because, as you know, lately, I haven't been enjoying their projects, their movies and TV shows at all. Final movie in this trilogy was decent. It made me sort of nostalgic for, the old days of Marvel. When we had really good movies, all the storylines were wrapped up pretty, or the storylines made sense. The characters were inspiring, not like they are now. I don't like being pessimistic, but with the current climate in Hollywood, especially now with the writer's strike, it's gonna be a long time before we're gonna see something good, unfortunately. I think Critical Drinker called his review of Guardians the best of the worst, and that describes it perfectly. How I feel, how this movie looks. It's definitely better than everything we've seen from Marvel lately, but it's still not as good as it's supposed to be. It's still not, for me at least, the same level of entertainment and storytelling that we've seen, especially from the Guardians 1 and 2. It's a solid return to the form for Marvel in general. It's doing pretty good. It started out very bad, like Ant-Man and Quantumania. I haven't even seen that one. I don't know. Let me guys know if it's, worth seeing. But I haven't seen any Marvel movie in the theater since Shang-Chi, probably. That was a long time ago. I don't know. It's still not enough to bring people back to Marvel, I think. It's because everyone is treating it as a goodbye. Because it is a very emotional movie, it's very heavy, especially for people who care about animals and can't really watch movies where animals get hurt. I was struggling with it. Second viewing, I was bawling halfway through the movie, and I could see my sister tensing up too. It makes me nostalgic for the previous Marvel movies, but it doesn't make me excited for more Marvel movies. It's like, okay, decent ending. That's it, thank you. Can we please move on to another ideas already? I recently watched an interview with James Gunn, who's the director and writer of Guardians, all volumes. And he said something that really stuck with me because that's something we could feel, I think, subconsciously about this story. He sees the whole trilogy as a journey to self, because first volume is very much about the mother of main character, how loss of mother figure in his life really shaped him into who he is. And second one is about the father, journey to finding out who his father is, who is the father that he thought he never had, but was the one he needed. And the third one is the journey to self. It's about discovering who you are. And I can see it. I can definitely see it in volume 1 and 2. And I can see what James Gunn was trying to do with volume 3. Because, especially with the ending, we see all of these characters choosing paths for themselves. But there's also several issues I have with that, because unfortunately third volume isn't as neat with its storytelling as the first 2 were. Let's break down firstly how each of the characters finds themselves in this story. And then I'm gonna tell you what are the parts of volume 3 that I didn't like and I thought should be better. But let's start with the overall story. So I would risk the statement that entire story of Peter and the Guardians is about the process of growing up and finding yourself. Let's start with Peter, the main character of the story. In Volume 1, Peter battles with loss and grief of his mother, but as much as he likes to pretend that he's fine with his light, goofy demeanor, she's there with him everywhere he goes. From his taste in music, with mixtapes that she curated for him, to his outlaw pseudonym, Star-Lord. That was her nickname for her son. In Volume 2, Peter struggles with the revelations about his father. He briefly falls for the alluring prospect of rewriting his past and having those quintessential father-son moments with Ego. But then is hit with a hard dose of reality. Ego is the father figure he longed for, but that was unrealistic and filled with lies as he learns that while Yondu wasn't the father he might have chosen for himself, he was the father he needed. In Volume 3, Peter finally comes into his own. His Gamora is gone. His friends, while they were a good substitute for family unit he never had, are unfortunately just that, friends. And Peter has to choose himself for once, choosing to grow up, accept his heritage, his self, and become a fully fleshed out human being. And this is an interesting thing because throughout the whole trilogy, of course, Peter was the main character, but I felt like in Volume 3, we didn't even have like a main character per se, because a lot of the movie is filled with retrospective about Rocket's beginning. You could probably try to argue that Rocket may be a main character in Volume 3, but that is not the case because we see Rocket mainly through flashbacks. He isn't really present for a majority of the movie as the character that we know and love nowadays. And Peter is sidelined as well. So I think Volume 3 suffers a little bit because of it, but at the same time it allows all of the characters to find themselves in the story. Gamora's journey to self is interesting and bittersweet. We have to applaud James Gunn for figuring out how to get out of the mess Russo brothers made with her character and still tell a story that resonates. Because for me, Gamora 2.0 is emblematic to that painful feeling of falling out of love and growing apart from your loved ones. Sometimes it happens in relationships. She's a completely different person than the one we come to know and love, and she finds her place outside of Guardians and outside of her relationship with Peter. Rocket's self-discovery is the most literal one in Volume 3, as we receive his entire backstory within the House of Horrors and get to meet his first friends. But most importantly, Rocket finally finds out and accepts that he's a raccoon in one of the most emotional and beautiful scenes in the movie. Groot grows up and develops on his own, and we as an audience finally understand his language at the end of the movie. Mantis, after years of being engulfed in other people's emotions, chooses to discover her own. And Drax, after years of being nothing but the destroyer, chooses to be a dad again and learns how to dance. I enjoyed this movie a lot, and it made me want to rewatch entire trilogy. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be, it made me feel like old MCU. And even though it was flawed, it delivered an emotional and poignant ending to these characters. But because Guardians always were very lighthearted and filled to the brim with comedy and especially slapstick comedy scenes, flashbacks with Rocket feel like they are tonally in a completely different movie for me. I think this volume is much more horrifying than the rest of Marvel movies because the retrospectives about Rocket are so cruel and horrific. It's very difficult to go back to that lighthearted energy in the next scene because they're always in between those funny, precious moments with the Guardians and, upbeat music. That it's like you're crying and you're getting into that horrifying space, and then cut, we are floating in space in silly spacesuits to upbeat music. It just feels so mismatched in tone. Should I be crying or laughing? It doesn't really make sense to cut those flashbacks in between those silly moments. And at the same time, Guardians are always a little bit goofy. Was there a way to tell this story a little bit differently? Probably. Maybe James Gunn was being a little bit too much of a James Gunn. It felt very jarring to go from like a very low energy to very high energy. That's the best way I can describe it. Also, I heard a lot of people talking about the villain, how it's probably the best villain since Thanos. Sure, it is. Not because of the performance for me of the actor, but because it was a good idea on paper. His actions are horrific and cruel and terrifying. This is not the villain we can empathize with at all. So, did you guys like the way he was portrayed? Because for me, he was just a screaming baby. It would have been so much more terrifying if he was like, you know, stone-faced, cruelty to the max, no emotions. He was very emotional, he was very expressive, he was very passionate. I was more terrified of his actions than him, if that makes sense. It was more about these flashbacks giving him meaning. If we hadn't have those flashbacks where we've seen the torture on those animals, he wouldn't have been that terrifying to me at all. He just wasn't imposing. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but... And we also have to talk about Adam. I love Will Poulter. I really do. And I know he probably had a blast making that movie because he's just so dumb. But I mean, he was a fun addition, but I don't really see the point to his character in this. I don't know. They were foreshadowing him in Volume 2, so they had to bring him into this one, and they didn't really have an idea how to make him into a proper villain. Or that was the idea all along, and, you know, it just came out very funny. And probably that was what they were going for. I don't know. At least it was Will Poulter, and he was able to sell that kind of character. So yeah, all in all, I liked this movie. I was very entertained. I was very moved. I was emotional at the end. Well, all of the characters are saying goodbye to each other and to us as the audience. But it was also a little bit heavy and bitter, and it really felt like a goodbye to this universe as a whole for me. You know, I'm always hopeful for Hollywood creatives and their stories and original content, but these days it's really like we're drowning in really bad storytelling. We'll see where Marvel will go from there. Tell me, what do you guys think? Did you like Guardians? Did you cry? I did. Did you like the ending of each character? Are you maybe hoping they're gonna bring them back? Are you excited for next MCU movie, if you know what it is? No, I think it's the Marvels. Are you excited about TV shows? I don't know. Loki is probably the only one that people are still maybe a little bit excited for, right? Thank you so much for watching. As always, thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please do and help me grow this channel. And I'll see you later. Bye.